Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. This video is a request that I've got from a couple of people. I'm going to be talking about the Major Arcana of the Tarot and going through the meanings of the Major Arcana cards of the Tarot. Now, I was originally planning on doing a few shorts for this, maybe a few reels, but there's quite a bit of detail to go into for each card. So I'm going to do a long form video and I'm going to split this into a series of 3 so I can really go into a lot of depth on the key meanings within each of the trump cards or the Major Arcana of the Tarot. I'll be referring to the Rider-Waite deck. This is my favorite deck because it's, the symbolism isn't too complicated, but it's got a bit more meaning to it than some of the much older decks. And the cards stay true to the traditional meanings. So that's the deck I'll be using to explain the meanings of the Major Arcana of the Tarot. This video will be covering cards 0 through 6, or the Fool to the Lovers. Okay, so the first card in the trump cards is of course the Fool. And this is card number 0. Although it appears first, it bears the number 0. And 0 here is not nothingness. 0 here should be seen as being potential, infinite possibility. As it's said in Fight Club, you have to lose everything to become anything. Think about 0, the number 0, the concept of nothingness, the way that the Buddhists might think of it, as something which is latent with possibility, which is a illuminating void. So a nothingness that contains potentially everything. So that is what is contained within the Fool card. When the tarot cards got appropriated as what we know today as the playing cards, at least the court cards and the number cards, the Fool card made it into playing decks as well in the form of the Joker. So this is really the wild card of the tarot deck. It can go in any direction. But if you draw it in a spread, it means new beginnings, new possibilities, starting at the very start of a journey. And you can see the Fool has got their bindle. They are on their way to a new adventure with very few possessions. But there's also, importantly, a kind of naivety or an innocence to the Fool, a foolishness, you might say. They're looking out into new horizons, but they're so excited that they risk stepping off a precipice. So while this card represents that you've got new beginnings, vast new possibilities, you are starting from nothing, and just be aware of your own ignorance in the situation, and don't be too naive as you make your new start. But there is a lot of potential in the situation that you're in. It could evolve in many different directions. So the next card is the Magician. Like the Fool, the Magician represents new beginnings, new ventures. However, in the case of the Magician, we have a much more active card. This is a person who is in a situation where they are creating their reality. They are creating a new situation. They are transforming a situation to be something new and exciting. So this is the card which is associated with manifesting your desire, manifesting your intent, hence the Magician. We see in the card many things indicating a magical figure. We have the as above, so below kind of a stance that the Magician is in. I've spoken about this in my previous video on the law of attraction. It's basically related to what you think and feel and will internally will be expressed externally. You also have here on the table the 4 tools of the Magician in Western esotericism: the cup, the pentacle, the wand or the staff, and the sword. And if you're familiar with the rest of the tarot deck, you will recognize these as the 4 suits of the number cards. and here they appear again, almost like the four aces appearing together again. The aces, of course, corresponding with the number 1 as well, and like the Magician card, representing a new beginning, a new venture. And the Magician card is really about initiating a process. And we talk about initiation rites in the past, which were really a kind of a magical ritual to push a human being to the next stage of their development. And that's what the Magician is doing here. And we have the infinity sign at the top of the Magician's head. Again, a symbol of potentiality, much as we saw embodied in the Fool. But now it's being actively brought into manifestation. Potentiality is in the beginning stages of becoming actuality. The next card in the Major Arcana is the High Priestess. This is a card that is very feminine, and it's also a card that is very related to intuition and spirituality more generally. So the High Priestess is card number 2 in the tarot, in the Major Arcana, I should say, indicated here. And there is a lot of true symbolism in the card, a lot of symbolism to do with duality and the interaction between opposites, indicated here by Jachin and Boaz. These were the 2 pillars of the temple that were part of the temple structure of the temple in Jerusalem in ancient Israel, and it's also used today in Freemasonry. And it represents 2 opposing poles, like the opposite poles of a magnet. And of course, opposites attract, and the attraction between opposites is the force in the universe that gives rise to something new, and which is the power behind conception. And that is what is really being embodied in this card. The High Priestess represents the power of conception, which again is referred to in the feminine figure here. And she sits between the 2 pillars, balancing those energies. So it's about conceiving something, something not quite being born, but something being first conceived. So perhaps something which begins in the unconscious realm, which is also very related to the High Priestess, because she represents the power of intuition, and she represents the power to just sit calmly between opposites and be the calm center and navigate through the dance of duality in life. And we have a lot of symbols of spiritual wisdom accompanying the High Priestess. She's got the cross over her heart. She has a scroll which says Torah, which of course is Hebrew for the law and a reference to the Torah. It represents higher spiritual principles. And she's got the crown of the priestess as well, with the double crescent horns of the moon of the priestess. So this is a card which invites you, if you draw it, to get in touch with your feminine side. Even if you're not a woman, you have a feminine side, and if you're not a man, you have a masculine side. And it's related to the powers of intuition and spiritual authority stemming from that. And something else interesting about the symbolism of this card, which I want to share with you, which I can't share just with this deck alone, can be found in the Marseille deck version of this card. The Marseille deck is not the oldest tarot deck, but it's one of the oldest, and it gives you a bit of insight into what the original intent behind the designs might have been. This is the High Priestess in the older Marseille deck, and she's called La Papesse. That's the female Pope, Pope Joan. Now you might be thinking, what? There was a woman who was Pope? Well, it's not confirmed, but there is a legend that there was in fact a secret woman Pope by the name of Pope Joan. That's a fascinating story, which I don't have time to go into in this video, but that's an interesting little reference, that there was this idea of a high priestess-like figure even hidden within the language of Christianity back in medieval times when this deck was first concocted. Okay, the next card is also a very feminine card, but it's a different aspect of the divine feminine energy. This is the Empress, card number 3 in the tarot cards, in the Major Arcana of the tarot. Okay, so there are a lot of very specific symbols to do with divine feminine energy in this card. The first one that I will draw your attention to is the crown here. It is in fact a crown of 12 stars. This is a reference to a very ancient idea, the idea of the Queen of Heaven. This is basically the feminine aspect of the Creator God. God wasn't always considered a being that had only a masculine polarity. And in fact, in ancient Israel, the Israelites worshipped Asherah for a long time as a feminine kind of divinity. But as the Yahwists took over, that kind of got eradicated. And now in the Kabbalah, with the idea of Aima, there is again an idea of the feminine aspect of divinity, but for a long time that was lost. And we relied on pagan depictions of the goddess for that kind of idea of the divine feminine to stay alive. However, this symbolism of the Queen of Heaven did also make its way into Christian symbolism as well. In the book of Revelation, chapter 12, we have the woman clothed with the sun and the moon at her feet, having a crown of 12 stars. And this woman possibly represented the Mother Mary, another symbol of the Divine Mother energy, or perhaps it represented the nation of Israel, the way that, say, Britannia is a personification of Great Britain, and this woman gives birth to a male child, and the dragon representing Satan tries to devour the child, hates the woman as mother, and hates the child, the male child that she is giving birth to. And this male child represented the Messiah in that prophecy. But we have this image of the child and the mother, a very prolific image throughout the ages, with the woman, with the mother representing the divine feminine. And that's what's being depicted here. Other imagery to do with the divine feminine here, of course, we have the shield shaped like the heart with the symbol for Venus, which has become very widely associated with femininity now, but was originally an astrological symbol. And of course, we have the pomegranate on the dress of the Empress. The pomegranate appeared in the High Priestess card as well. The symbolism of the pomegranate to do with the divine feminine is all related to the myth of Persephone, who got taken down to the underworld for 3 months, had to stay there because she ate the seeds of the pomegranate given to her by Hades, and after 3 months emerges, and that's why the spring arrives, and that's why the world grows green again. So we have symbolism of fertility, of the natural world, all being embodied in this card, and all related to that divine feminine energy. So the predominant symbolism of this card is to do with birth. We saw the process of conception in the High Priestess card, and now this represents a situation of birth. So perhaps you're expecting a child in the literal sense, or perhaps you're entering a new period where something which you've been working on for a long time is finally coming into reality, or perhaps you're entering a period of abundance. Those things can all be represented by this card. It can also represent the harmony of being in nature, but it's more the birth kind of stuff that is the symbolism behind this card and the meaning behind drawing this card. All right, next up we have the Emperor. This is card numbered 4 in the Major Arcana. The Emperor, in contrast to the last two, this is a very masculine card. The Emperor is the complement of the Empress, as you would imagine. And while the Empress has very Venusian energy, the Emperor has very Martian energy. We see a lot of ram's skulls or ram's heads on the throne of the Emperor, representing the astrological sign of Aries, ruled by Mars. Both Aries and Mars are very warlike signs. They represent being very motivated. They represent being very driven to succeed or even to conquer. And of course, the color red is also related to Mars as well. And so we have a very masculine energy to be contrasted with the very feminine energy of the Empress. The Emperor is a very fatherly figure in contrast to the more maternal Empress. And we also see here there's armor underneath the Emperor's robes. There's a crown. There's a orb that he's holding in his hand. All of these are symbols of imperial authority. They're symbols of kingly authority. So we have one who embodies order and structure and authority. And so if you draw this card, you may be called in a situation in your future to embody those qualities, and also the activity and virility of Mars and Aries that is also a feature of the Emperor card. The Emperor card calls you to exercise control over your domain, calls you to build your empire. All right, next up we have the Hierophant. The Hierophant is number 5 in the Major Arcana, and this card is known as the Pope in older decks such as the Marseille deck. And as you've probably already gathered, much as the Empress and the Emperor are complementary masculine and feminine cards, the Hierophant is the complement of the High Priestess, who of course is the female Pope. And there's another duality here as well, because just as the High Priestess represented spiritual authority, where the Empress represented a more worldly authority, represented by her role as the Empress, represented by physical nature, the Hierophant represents spiritual authority, where the Emperor represented worldly authority, literally the authority of political institutions or governments, whereas the Hierophant represents the religious institution. And we see here very overt symbolism of the Pope. You've got the keys of St. Peter, of course, representing the apostolic succession of Peter and the subsequent heads of the church succeeding Christ, at least so they claim, to be the rightful successors of Christ, lending them spiritual authority. You've got the papal tiara, again a symbol of spiritual authority, but also of worldly authority, as we often see kings wearing the crown, and I'll get to that overlap in a moment. We also have the triple cross. This can be a reference to the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, or it can be a reference to dominion over, spiritual dominion over 3 levels of reality: heaven, the infernal realm, and earth in the middle. Representing a total spiritual dominion. And of course, we see the authority of this Hierophant figure with the 2 monks, not so much bowing down, but definitely in a submissive pose before this figure, who's also doing the sign of benediction. This is another spiritual symbol of blessing and authority. The Hierophant is a very specific title of office. So there's lots of ways that a person might wield spiritual authority. If you think of like a mystic or a monk, even some of the prophets, they're a person who receives visions or has spiritual experiences, but then they kind of keep to themselves, or they don't have an interest or much of an effect on the secular world, on the world of ordinary people, of society. But that is not the Hierophant. The Hierophant has a connection to the divine, but then is able to draw down the wisdom of that position and then exercise authority over the world and reshape the world or guide the world to be in line with those higher spiritual principles. That is the specific role of the Hierophant. So it's actually a role within society. So the Hierophant as a spiritual symbol is also a symbol of tradition, of religious institutions or structures, but it can just as easily be a generic form of spiritual leadership. So if you draw this card in a spread, perhaps it's indicating that you will take up a role of spiritual leadership, or perhaps it's indicating that you will have some relationship with spiritual authority perhaps of a very traditional type. Okay, that brings us to card number 6, which is the final card I will discuss today. This is the Lovers. So, the symbolism here, some of it is quite obvious. We've got a man and a woman who appear to be in a kind of a marriage rite. They also quite clearly represent Adam and Eve. And we see the two trees in the Garden of Eden, the tree of knowledge on this side, indicated by the serpent, and the tree of life, which has got flaming kind of leaves, which perhaps is a reference to the burning bush of Moses. So we have a relationship that's indicated. The most obvious form would be a romantic relationship, but this could also represent a choice. But of course, implicit in every new relationship, there is a choice to begin that relationship or not. And so we have, that is the choice that is before the people in this card. If you draw this card, it's probably a choice that is before you. It's probably referring to some kind of romantic situation that you may have an opportunity to enter. Another interesting thing about this card is the way that the man is looking at the woman, but the woman is looking up at this angel. So there's this kind of spiritual principle that is playing a role in their union. And in the older version of this, in the Marseille deck, the figure that is between the two lovers is in fact Cupid shooting the arrow. So we have this kind of concept of a spiritual force that is acting through the union of these other two lovers. And if you couple that with the way that the woman is looking ultimately up to the heavens, then you have been communicated what is one of the most sacred mysteries of the esoteric world, which is that one of the most potent ways back to knowledge of the divine and union with the divine is through that power of love felt between two people. But that's all that I'll say on that. But that is the first 7 cards of the Major Arcana of the Tarot. I hope you enjoyed that video. I will cover the other cards in the same amount of detail in the subsequent videos. There's a lot to go through, so I really wanted to break this one up. But I hope that you found that informative. If you did enjoy it, please leave a like on this video, subscribe to my channel to support my work. You can also subscribe to my Odyssey account. Any comments that you have, leave them down below. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.